And we are back on the build phase. I'm Mr. Ben, and today I want to talk about the Superior Genetics Tournament again. But before I get to that, I'm going to get a running start at it because there's a few other things I want to talk about. So on Facebook, there is an announcement for an event, Ohio versus Midwinter Prep. It's, of course, in the Midwinter format. This is at Woodburn Games on December 10th. And I want to plug that event because, go to your local events. That's something we're a big fan of on this show. But also, the image that is posted to promote this event is all the incursion cards, all the band cards, like laid out in one frame. And it looks really cool. Now, I know I'm sort of like the subset of like the most passionate fans of this game, but it looks really cool. And I don't know if David took time to kind of arrange them to make it like visually pleasing, or if this was just the order the cards were in his binder, and so it came out that way, or what the organization was. But I kind of want this image like on a playmat, like as a piece of versus history. At this moment in time, these were the things that were so powerful, we destroyed them, which I've always been a fan of the flavor of Incursion, destroying cards. So that's pretty cool. I also wanted to touch on the Aces and Eights show. So I'm going to talk about the Superior Genetics format, or tournament, I guess. Well, I guess it's also a format. I'm going to talk about what the guys at the Aces and Eights show are putting on as this event and the format. But like, if you're listening to this show, I have to assume you're also listening to the Aces and Eights podcast. And if you're not, you should remedy that. Like, subscribe to that show. There's not enough versus content. Let's show love to all the creators out there. On their latest show, so a couple shows ago, I talked about the Superior Genetics event, the tournament that these guys are putting on. And I I don't even want to use the word criticism because it was more, I thought it was going to be a certain way and it was a different way. So that's not really fair to call that a criticism just because like I made something up in my head. But the full scope of what they planned for this event was there's kind of like a Swiss round, and I think they called that a placement round. And then it kind of goes to a top cut, which is their sort of version of finals. But they're doing a little different than what you would expect from your typical event. And the cool thing, or the unique thing, is we went from, in the placement rounds, you had to have a X-Men or Brotherhood affiliated main character, but you could use any card in the binder. And in the finals, it's X-Men and Brotherhood cards only, which I think is really cool. I don't know if this is the only event that has had a change of format between Swiss and Top Cut. I feel like that was something we did like way back in the day, maybe, but it hasn't been done for a long time. And I think it's very cool. I kind of forgot that this was a thing that we could even do, is have these format changes mid-event and change up the card pool. And I'm really excited. I guess one of the lessons I learned is I talked for like a half hour or whatever it was about being excited about a limited card pool. And the lesson I learned from that was like, hey man, sometimes just shut up and be patient because you're going to get what you want. Now, at the time that I recorded that, I didn't know that there was going to be this format change to the Superior Genetics event. And I'm really excited about it. Like I saw the post. I'm like, oh, that's super cool. Like, it's both cool as a tournament format to change things up. And this is something we have the luxury of doing in these webcam events that I think maybe we don't take advantage of enough. You know, I understand. Let me rephrase that. I will speak from first person perspective. When Joe and John and I initially talked about doing build phase events online, which at the time, I think we were the first to do any kind of and the first season was Octagon. It wasn't even webcam. When we initially talked about it, it was 100% us trying to copy and replicate the tournament feeling, but for people who couldn't travel to events. And this was a world before COVID. This was the before times. We still had the problem of there not being enough versus events for us to get out there and play. And often, like in the early days, getting a little far afield from what I wanted to talk about here, but in the early days of Versus, all of the events were always inside cons. So it generally meant like a convention fee, whatever kind of parking situation, like hotels, or like going to a con is more expensive than going to a local game store for a regional. So I prefer the new approach that they have. And I think does better at building community too. What we were trying to do was replicate the feeling of playing in a competitive environment for people who couldn't afford a con fee plus travel plus everything else. Like that was kind of our philosophy going into, at the time, what we called build phase league play, BPLP. And I think something that we missed, or something we haven't taken enough advantage of along the way, is the webcam format. Like we spent a lot of time talking about the deficiencies of webcam, like the glare, the awkwardness, the barrier to entry, sound issues, technical issues, fair play issues. Like we focus on that a whole lot, and we almost never think about the flexibility that this provides. Like we could actually do like big best of 5, or that might be a little too much, but best of 3 events where you have to build 3 different decks. And it doesn't matter if you want to use some of the same cards across those 3. Oh, I have to change these sleeves real quick. Like there's real world constraints and time constraints on any brick and mortar 1-day tournament. But these kinds of online events where you could potentially have to play a different deck every round, which is something, again, I feel like we've done that at some point, but we could force players to take bigger use of the card pool. And I think Buckeye League does this with the main character draft. And that's another thing that would be really difficult to do in person. Although I guess they did kind of do a version of that at their regional where you had a couple of decks built. Maybe you didn't know the exact main character you were going to get, but you had a good idea of it. So that's kind of a merging of the two. But changing formats in the middle of an event, that's something I don't think you could spring. Well, you absolutely couldn't spring on players. If we all showed up to Milwaukee at midwinter and we played through Swiss and we go to Top Cut and Peter's like, okay, before we sit down to Top Cut, all of your decks that have non-X-Men and Brotherhood cards, they're all cut. Those are now illegal. You can only wait, we have to build whole new decks. We didn't know. Like that would never work in person. But over an online event, you make the announcement, you give everybody a couple weeks. Now, maybe it's unfair of me. First of all, apologize to all the competitors in this event because I have twice been the bad person who had life events conspire to make me turn in my game results late. So I apologize to everybody. I hate that happened. But also, making a big tournament announcement the week of Thanksgiving, I feel like I get a little bit of grace for that one kind of going down the memory hole. Anyway, but giving everybody a couple weeks, one of those weeks being Thanksgiving week, to build new decks, I think is a really cool thing. And that's a thing that could not exist in the brick and mortar 1-day tournament space. Even a multi-day tournament, that gets into some dicey territory. Like if you have to travel somewhere, did you bring your whole collection? Often those of us that are sane don't travel with their whole collections. Sometimes I have taken my entire collection places, but that's a little extra, I understand. I think this is very cool. They talked about this on their show, how they were changing the format and how this was the plan all along. And it really just dovetailed with exactly what I was looking for with this event really, really perfectly. So I wanted to talk about how excited I was for that. And I also suppose while I'm on this kind of mixed and muddled topic agenda here, in their latest episode, Ralph said some very kind things about me. Maybe praise I don't totally deserve in terms of gameplay results and at the table, but the kind things about how I engage with the community. I know sometimes we talk a little trash. We sometimes get a little chippy with each other. And at the end of the day, I always want there to be kind of an aura of respect and a feeling of mutual respect with people in the community. That is what I'm trying to do. I do think a little bit of trash talk is kind of fun, but I try really hard to not ever step over the line and hurt anybody's feelings for real. And in the times that I have, I apologize for that. I am sorry for the times that I've got it wrong. Anyway, I just wanted to acknowledge that Ralph said some very kind things, and I appreciate that, and definitely sub to their show. Okay, the new format was basically what I was hoping for. It's only characters out of X-Men and Brotherhood. Alt wins are banned, and I think the mutant loyalty cards, because that's a little too obvious. So there were some limitations on the card pool, but for the most part, it's these two teams go nuts, which is very limiting in that well, I guess you can't really say that these two teams are limiting anymore, right? Like how many times have we revisited X-Men and Brotherhood at this point? Brotherhood sort of in my head is still kind of categorized as like a team that needs help. But that's just not fair. Like, that's just not true anymore. They have a lot of really cool and interesting things going on over there. Both of these teams have a lot of robust options in reality, despite the weak start that the brother had gotten the game. Now they have a whole lot of stuff going on. And it was really fun to think about these cards in terms of such a narrow silo. Like, what's going to be good in this format? Well, and there's a few gimmies. Like, obviously, Unwavering, you kind of have to play Unwavering. Do you want to play Stand Together? I feel like a lot of players, knowing that there's like so heavy incentives to go mono team, my inclination was not to rely very heavily on superpowers. Like, if I can get them, cool. But the expectation that a Stand Together is going to be present, sure, yeah, that's probably not an unlikely circumstance. So that's the way I approach deck building. And you have to build two decks for this because you've got your X-Men and your Brotherhood. And you also need to be respectful of your opponent's time. So if you've only got one playset of a particular important card, um, maybe you have that playset pulled out and you use the same sleeves for both decks to make sure you can shuffle it in real quick. That's more or less the approach I intended to take, but I ended up just building two separate decks. Played the first round in the new format last night, and I feel like it was more a case of not so much that my deck worked out really well. I mean, it did do what it was supposed to do, but it was more a case of my opponent's deck kind of didn't show up to play. And those wins are not my favorite. I much prefer to have like fighty games where we're both doing big plays and doing things. And it wasn't like a one-sided beatdown, but ultimately I just had a character to recruit every turn, and Toad has a really big defense, and Deadpool has a small attack, and that's just kind of what it came down to. Like, if you hit your curve and the other person doesn't hit their curve, all other things being equal, the curve hitter probably wins that one, and that's more or less what happened there. So it was fun enough game, but I don't know how much credit I can actually take for it. Looking forward to playing my next round here in a couple of days, or tomorrow, I guess. And I just, more than any specific matchup, I want to flag, I guess, two things. The adjustment mid-season, mid-event, I think that's really cool. And I think that's something we should lean into, do more often, and do in bigger ways in these online events. I think for a long time, our worry was asking people to build too many decks or to do too many changes would just make nobody want to play. And if the way we're going to enjoy this game, or one of the main ways we're going to enjoy this game, is via webcam, let's play with more cards. Like, let's do more things. I think that's cool. And two, again, this kind of almost flies in the exact opposite direction of what I just said, but let's do weird things with the card pool and have like severe constraints where cards that might not otherwise ever be good enough to see play will get cycled in because the card pool is, I don't know, deleting all 3-cost characters. Or I mean, that'd be kind of a lame format, but that's the general idea. Like, let's do more dramatic things with the card pool. I think probably the Quarantine Cup is maybe one of the times that I think hit these pretty well. And I'd like to go back. Like, I think, was it Quarantine Cup 2 where it was like a different format every 2 weeks? Like, yeah, that feels like a thing that happened. I don't know, man. The COVID years are so bad. Like, it's hard for me to like clearly remember anything that happened during that time. I like what's happening in the Superior Genetics format. I like what's happening in Buckeye League. And I just think, like, heading into 2024, I'd like to see webcam events maybe differentiate themselves from brick and mortar real life events a little bit more and try to take better advantage of the time and the access to cards and the scheduling and all of the things that go into making a webcam event unique from a, hey, we all have to be in the same place at the same time type of event, and take more advantage of that. So maybe that's sort of like a mission statement for an upcoming build phase league is these are the thoughts that are kind of cooking. So that's where I'm going to leave it for today. As always, a huge shout out to all the patrons of the show. If you like what we're doing here, patreon.com/thebuildphase. It helps keep the lights on, and you can join the coolest clubhouse in Versus. I'm Mr. Ben. This has been the Build Phase, and until next time, go win some games.